McLaughlin's model of information processing. So let's look at more closely at McLaughlin's model of information processing. Now, the basic principle underlying this model is that learning of all difficult and complex skills takes place in small steps, in small modules, and these have to be the simplest of everything else. That means if you have to climb a flight of stairs, this would mean that one stair at a time has to be climbed, and the stair that is the lowest of all must be stepped on first before you climb up the whole flight of stairs. So basic belief of this model is that human beings are autonomous. They have agency to learn a thing. So they are not passive learners. Rather, they are autonomous and they are active beings. So they voluntarily learn a language. It is not that the language is just assimilated in their minds when they are exposed to a language. Mind itself is actually a symbol processing system. So different symbols in the terms of images, language symbols are presented before the mind, and the mind processes it. Another aspect which is related to the first aspect we talked about is that there is a belief that all complex behavior is composed of simple steps or simple processes, and these simple processes must be learnt before the more complex behaviors are learnt. So this also means that individual components of a complex behavior can also be studied separately, and these can be isolated from each other and studied in detail. For instance, we talked about fluency. So fluency can be studied apart from, for instance, learning strategies or anything else. Or grammatical structure or learning of the grammar can be studied in isolation from the learning of vocabulary, for instance. In any case, it says or it believes that the mind is a limited processor of information. So the capacity of the mind at one given moment is definitely limited. So you cannot possibly learn everything at the same time, and it has to be broken down into simpler tasks for the mind to process the information that is coming to it. So let's all try to apply all these principles to second language learning itself. So second language learning by cognitive, this approach is seen as a complex cognitive task. It is complex cognitive task, and it has, again, like we talked about, each complex task can be broken down into simpler tasks, and it has several simpler components to it. Similarly, different aspects of the language have to be broken down and learned separately before they are integrated into one whole. And this requires automation of component subskills. Automation means that this would need that one subskill has been learned so much that it is almost automatically accessed by the mind, and it frees up your working memory, and then only you can learn the other skill and move on to the other gradually as you acquire more skill to learn the language. So the whole language learning process is actually moving from controlled to automized or automatized processing. And learning means a shift from this controlled thinking about things or rules to the rules becoming so automatic in your mind that your mind accesses those rules of using the language before you even think of it. So you are constantly focused on the communicative event rather than on thinking of which words or how the grammatical structure will be. However, in this process of automation, there will be a constant restructuring of the information, and there will always be a move of certain subskills that you have learned from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. So, whenever a subskill becomes automized, it is moved into from the working memory to the long-term memory. And as it moves from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, we say that a skill has been learned, and the space of the short-term memory has been vacated for other subskills to be learned. It explains fossilization. Fossilization would mean that when the second language learner seems unable to get rid of a certain structure which is incorrect, no matter how many times or how much feedback has been given, the error remains there, rooted in the language production of the learner. We call that fossilization. And cognitive approaches would say that this results from something that happens related to the controlled process of language, and at that specific time, the item that has been learned is transferred prematurely to the long-term memory. So before it is learned correctly, it is transferred to the long-term memory, and once in the long-term memory, it is very difficult to correct that, and that results in fossilization.